So now I want to transition into focusing on 6 steps for successfully tutoring an ESL student. And as I said, not all of you will be tutors, but I still think you can benefit from this discussion. So I just want to give you the big picture of how to be successful.
Okay, it's tomorrow.
And preview some of our processes and documents that we have in place to help you be successful. So just as a caveat, I want to say this presentation is tailored very specifically to the particular context of Mid-State Literacy Council. There are many different ways of approaching the role of tutoring an ESL student, but since many of you are novices, we want to lay out some guidelines to help you get started and that we know from experience are effective, so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. But you certainly can bring your own ideas and your own individuality into it as well. But we just are giving you a very basic framework, and pardon me if it's really too basic and obvious, but we'd rather take it slow than have anyone feel like you don't know how to begin. The majority of what we talk about today, as I said, will be focused on preparing to tutor. So just be aware that session 2 and 3 will go into more detail about the how-tos and the techniques of actually planning and tutoring. This presentation is more about preparing for all of that. But if it seems overly broad, I just want to assure you that I hope by the end of session 3, you will have a clear answer to what may be your main question right now. What do I actually do? What do I do with my student? We'll get there. Before I go into the 6 steps, I want to give you a guiding principle for how we think about working with our language students here. And a guiding principle to frame all of your work here as a tutor or a teacher. And here is what it is. Remember that you are teaching a person, not a language. So let that sink in for a minute. You're teaching a person, not a language. So this is just a play on direct objects and indirect objects. Obviously, you are teaching a language to a person, but I put it this way to kind of foreground the person over the language. So you don't think about, okay, like I need to know all about this language and then give it to this person. Start with the person himself or herself. You will, of course, be teaching English language communication skills, and grammar charts like the one on this slide, which shows different ways to conjugate the verb to be, they can be very helpful. I love grammar charts, actually, very much, and I think they're totally appropriate to use, and they definitely helped me learn languages. So the big X there doesn't mean they're terrible. No, they're great, but it's not where you should start with your thinking. We want you to start with the human being in front of you, because what I want to suggest to you is that no one ever masters a language, period. There's always more to learn if you think about it, right? Even in your own language, there are things you can do well in English or in whatever your native language is, and things that other people can do much better than you. That's always the way it is. So maybe you're great at conversation, but you struggle to write academic papers on certain topics, or you would struggle to do that. Or maybe you're a voracious reader of literature with an impressive reading vocabulary, but you find it difficult to give oral presentations in a class or in a training session, something like that. So you as English tutors and teachers, you cannot teach mastery of the English language as a whole, especially in 10 weeks, right? But what you can do is get to know what matters to your student or students and focus on those skills. And I assure you, you can make a significant difference in 10 weeks. Let me give you an example. So imagine a mother here who has very minimal English language proficiency, and she's been in state college now for just a few weeks, and her son becomes ill. She wants to help him. Being able to conjugate the verb to be in all the tenses is not going to help her much in this situation, right? Having an extensive English medical vocabulary and knowing the definitions and correct pronunciation of all the key terms in an epidemiology textbook is not going to help her very much in this situation. What she needs to know how to do is how to schedule an appointment in state college, on the telephone or through the website. She needs to know how to understand and answer questions about her health insurance. She needs to know how to say things, simple phrases like, my son had the sniffles, stuffy nose, and a cough for 9 days, and now his ear hurts, and his temperature is 101 degrees. So this kind of everyday language and vocabulary is extremely valuable to her. And if she practices with some support and some models, she'll become more fluent, more clear, and more confident. So again, just keep in mind, when you're making plans, I'm teaching a person, not a language. How can I help this person? Get to know about your student, what they want or need to be able to do in their lives. Help them predict what's going to happen, what they're going to see or hear in terms of English. And then give them structured, supported opportunities to practice the English communication skills they'll need for those situations. In the field of English or English language teaching, this is actually a certain approach called ESP, English for Specific Purposes. And it's an approach that isn't suitable for all situations. I know I didn't use this approach when I was studying Spanish in high school, Spanish for specific purposes, but it is an approach that can be very effective in a place like Mid-State Literacy Council, where your time with your students is limited, right? You don't have 4 or 5 years with them, most likely, and where they have very immediate needs to be able to communicate. So that's why we're recommending this approach. So now I'll present to you the 6 steps where we recommend for successfully tutoring a student, when we suggest you complete each step in the process, and we'll go over the processes and documents that you can expect to see. So step number 1, unsurprisingly, get to know your student. This should begin before you even meet your student and should continue throughout, the entire tutoring experience. You can always get to know your student better, but you will receive a student report before you meet your student, just like, very similar to the ones that we were talking about today. You'll know something about their background, what their life is like now, what their broad goals are, and some estimate of their English language proficiency. In the introductory meeting, the very first time we introduce you to your student, that's the next step in getting to know your student. Now, if you're teaching a class, we're not gonna do things exactly the same way, but the principle applies, that you might want to spend some time in the first week, getting to know a little bit more about your students. Okay, again, we're not going to read all of this. I just wanted to give you a picture in your mind of the student and tutor introductory meeting guide. So we will give this to you. It's also on the volunteer resources Google Drive, and it just structures that very first meeting for you. So when you first meet your student and you're getting to know him or her, either Bridget and I will lead the first part of the meeting. We'll introduce you to each other. We'll encourage you to exchange your contact information and decide where you're going to meet. We'll share some recommended books with you and say, these are some books that we think might work. These are some ideas. Then we will leave the room, and then you take it from there as the tutor. You can spend the rest of your session getting to know your student better. And I'll talk you through that a little bit more, what you want to do in this meeting. So step 2 is to specify, confirm, and prioritize goals for your semester with the student. This is really what we want you to accomplish in the introductory meeting with the support of a student goals worksheet. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. So this is where, in this intro meeting, you really start to build a relationship with your students. And again, we don't require this for class teachers to collect written goals, but if you want to incorporate this into your first week of classes, you can consider doing that. So we'll give you a worksheet like this when we introduce you to each other, basically a place to put your names and the date, and we want you to identify 2 to 4 specific achievable goals for the semester. and rank them in order of priority. We're going to talk more about that right now. So this is just to give you an example of how you go about step 2. So for Amina, on the student report, her goals were listed like this. Amina's immediate goals are to improve her practical English communication skills for life in State College. Although she hopes to pursue academic goals here at Penn State, she said that higher level reading and writing can wait until she enrolls at the intensive English communication program. For now, she wants the speaking and listening skills to be able to integrate into the community, function independently, and make friends. So what you might say to confirm that you understand her goals, something like this. I understand that you're interested in practical English communication skills. Could you tell me more about that? That's the kind of thing you're going to say in that introductory meeting. Or to specify, this is really important, specification. In which situations have you struggled to communicate in English here in State College? Who specifically do you want to be able to speak more fluently with? And when you ask these specification questions, sometimes it can be very eye-opening. You know, you have an idea of who she wants to be able to communicate with, but when you probe a little bit more, you might find that the answer is actually very different, and she's trying to communicate with people that you haven't thought of, you know? Like, I might think she wants to be able to communicate with her child's teacher or something like that, when really what she's worried about is going to the bank or being able to order food in a restaurant. So you want to encourage your student to be as specific as possible about where they're struggling and where they want to participate. And then in terms of prioritization, this is important. In case we don't have time to get to all of your goals, because you don't know how fast the progress is going to be, which one would you say is the most important to you at this time? And that's why you want to help the student prioritize in order so that you definitely get to the most important ones before you might run out of time. All right, I want to talk a little bit more about examples of specific feasible goals. So when I ask students, why do you want to learn English? They very often say, or why are you here? Why do you want to study with us? I want to improve my English, or I want to sound like a native speaker. So that's often their first answer. Maybe they haven't analyzed it beyond that, but we really want to help them get beyond that, because these answers are just too broad to really be workable. So improve, that's where we need to be more specific. And the whole issue of sounding like a native speaker, we want to sort of certainly honor their interest in becoming more comprehensible, right? And maybe improving their pronunciation so people can understand them better. But the reality is that very few adults are able to change their phonology to sound, to adopt the sounds of a different language. And also, when you say sound like a native speaker, which native speaker? Everybody speaks English in a different way. So I think in that one, we just want to steer them more towards comprehensibility and really validate that interest, that they want to be able to speak fluently and clearly with their intended meaning in a way that people will understand. Okay, but here are some examples of specific achievable goals, the kind of goals we want to see on your student worksheet or your student goals worksheet, because these are very workable. For example, be able to respond appropriately to emails from my child's school, right? I can just see those lessons right now. That's really doable. Be able to request repairs at the maintenance office for my apartment. So being able to verbally express, my oven doesn't work, whatever, those kinds of things. That's something you can focus on and make a true difference quickly. Be able to interview for specific types of jobs. That's a great thing to work on in tutoring sessions. And then you'd want to become more specific. What kind of job? Let's look at examples of different kinds of jobs. Let's predict what kinds of questions you would be asked in those interviews. So these are the kind of goals we want you to try to get at in that first meeting. Then, step 3, identify learning objectives. This should happen after the introductory meeting, but as much as possible before tutoring or teaching begins. And it may evolve over time, but you might be asking yourself, what's the difference between student goals and learning objectives? So I want to clarify how I'm defining these terms for our purposes, clarify this distinction, and give you a quick example from one of our student profiles. So this picture, I think, helps to clarify what I mean. So you will have specific goals that you identify through your introductory meeting, and then you want to break those down into even more specific learning objectives by asking yourself these kinds of questions. What will the student need to be able to do in English to achieve that goal? Also, what will the student need to know about English and or about cultural norms to do those things in his or her life? So I like to use basketball as an analogy here. So if you want to become a better basketball player, one thing you can do is just play basketball games. Play. All right. Now that would be like, okay, let's just practice conversation, or let's practice interviewing. But if you have a good coach, a basketball coach, your coach will probably also help break the game of basketball down into more specific skills that you need, so you can practice those skills and really focus on those elements one at a time before you put them in the context of a game. So you will practice dribbling, you will practice passing, different kinds of passes, you will shoot 1,000 free throws, and all of that eventually you put together to be a good player in a game. It's the same thing with language learning. If you're tutoring, you're like a coach, and you want to, doing an interview or talking to moms at the bus stop is too much at once. So you want to help break those communication tasks down into more specific language, English language knowledge and goals. So let's look at an example. So for Amina, Amina's goal on the student worksheet, let's say, was to be able to request and participate in a meeting with her child's preschool teacher. So if I saw that, I would say, okay, what are the things she needs to know and be able to do in order to do that? These are some learning objectives that come to mind. A writing goal. She needs to be able, first of all, to write an appropriate, polite email to request the meeting. And that can be broken down even further into, let's look at email greetings. Let's look at the grammar of making polite requests in English, in writing. Let's look at examples of how to express your availability for a meeting, and then what are a variety of ways to appropriately close an email. You don't want to say like bye. Like there are more appropriate ways of interacting with a teacher in an email, and you can talk about all those. So those would be good learning objectives. Nice series of lessons right there. She also, of course, needs to be able to speak. So some speaking learning objectives. She needs to be able to appropriately greet someone in a professional setting. So this goes into, of course, the verbal expressions, but also maybe the body language, the facial expressions. What can she expect, and what might she want to do to project friendliness and respect in this setting. These things vary culturally. They're not the same all over the world. So it's worth discussing. Also, another speaking learning objective, to be able to politely express concerns, how to politely disagree, and how to request action. Those are difficult things to do, even in your first language. But in a second language, with all the cultural differences, even more challenging. So I would want to do a lot of practice with all those different kinds of functions, speech functions that take place in a meeting with a teacher. And get into her specific, if she does have any concerns, any particular actions that she wants to request. Let's write it out and let's practice speaking. And reverse roles, so that she can really be prepared for that meeting. And then another learning objective would be to encourage her maybe to write a thank you note after the meeting or email, and how to confirm the details of the meeting. And I might even, we could write that together. Okay, so you can broadly think of the goals as what your student wants to be able to do in their lives, what they want to be able to participate in, and then the learning objectives as the specific English language skills that they'll need to achieve those goals or participate in those activities.